You're about to hear a true legend from the dusty corners of the American West where a mistreated girl and a wild horse found each other and ran toward freedom. The Arizona sun was merciless, baking the dry earth into cracked patterns. Like broken porcelain, on the far end of the Baxter Ranch, the golden stallion stood still in the Clementine, magnificent and furious. Round him, sweat-drenched ranch hands swore and stumbled, ropes limp in their exhausted hands. The air crackled with tension, thick with dust and the tang of frustration. Behind the wooden fence, Clementine Ross pressed her swollen cheek against the slats, her breath shallow. The morning had already gifted her another bruise for it accidentally spilling a bucket of water. She didn't cry anymore when she was beaten. Tears had become a luxury she couldn't afford. At 19, Clementine looked more like a ghost than a girl thin from years of starvation. Her once smooth skin now rough from sun and work. She had lived on this ranch since the fever took her. Parents and not a single soul had ever asked her what she wanted. She cooked, cleaned, shoveled manure, and served the Baxters like she was a thing, not a person. The stallion thrashed suddenly, muscles gleaming like molten gold. He reared up, hooves slicing the air with power, sending two ranchers stumbling backward. The third man tried circling with a rope, but the horse pivoted like a phantom, always one step ahead. It was as if he was fighting not just captivity, but every injustice he had ever known. Clementine watched with breathless awe. The stallion was unlike anything she had ever seen untamed, defiant, glorious. Then he paused. Dark eyes met hers through the fence, and everything stilled. The world shrank to that single gaze. Something passed between them, not in words, but in a deep and quiet understanding. He was trapped to Jedediah Baxter, the ranch's cruel master. Notice the stallion's focus, his face twisted into a grin that never meant anything good. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered, spitting tobacco into the dirt. He walked toward Clementine, boots crunching on gravel. Her back stiffened. She knew that look. It always preceded pain or orders she couldn't refuse. "Girl," he growled, eyes flicking from the horse to her. "That beast's taken a leak into you." Clementine kept her head bowed. She had learned long ago that silence was safer. The bruises on her arms were still healing from the last time she had spoken without permission. Martha Baxter emerged from the porch, dressed like she belonged in a mansion, not a ranch. Her face was stone, eyes calculating as she watched both her husband and the girl. "You're not serious, Jedediah," she said, her voice as cold as her stare. But the stallion wasn't paying attention to the men anymore. He was pacing now, closer to Clementine.com, almost waiting. It was undeniable. He saw her. He saw her. Jedediah's mind was already spinning with the possibility. That horse was worth a fortune if he could be broken, but none of his hired men could get within 10 feet of him. Maybe the worthless girl could do what grown men couldn't. "You're going in there?" he ordered. Clementine's breath caught. "Sir," she whispered, eyes wide. "You heard me? That horse wants something from you. Let's find out what." She shook her head, weakly. I don't know how. I've never even ridden a horse." Jedediah's hand hovered near his belt, the leather strap never far from reach. "You'll do as you're told." Martha stepped closer. "If she dies in there, we lose our free labor." Think Jedediah, but he wasn't listening. His greed had already overpowered his reason. He grabbed Clementine's thin wrist and pulled her toward the corral. The ranch hands hesitated. Had seen wild horses ruin men's spines and shatter bones. This was a death sentence. But no one dared to fight Jedediah Baxter. As the gate creaked open, the stallion's ears perked. He lifted his head and stared. Clementine felt her knees tremble. The corral stretched before her like a battlefield, and her only ally was a creature no one could control. Jedediah shoved her forward. "Get in there." Her heart pounded as she stepped into the dust. The gate shut behind her like a prison door. For a moment, there was nothing but silence then. The stallion began to move, but he didn't charge. He walked slowly, deliberately, his eyes locked on hers, his massive frame as graceful as flowing water. She stood still, frozen with fear and awe as he came closer. Closer. He lowered his head, bowed, almost. Clementine extended a trembling hand, and the stallion pressed his muzzle into her palm. A hush fell over the ranch. Even the wind seemed to stop. It was a moment no one expected. Dan Clementine would never forget. She touched his neck gently, feeling the warmth of his skin, the softness of his golden coat. For the first time in years, something saw her, not as a tool, not as labor, but as a person. Now, get on him, Eudodia barked. Clementine flinched. The stallion's ears twitched, sensing the tension. I don't think I can, she whispered. Jed, Odia, took a step forward. I didn't ask what you think. The stallion moved, then not away, but closer to stand between her and the man's voice. Martha's voice rang out, sharp and warning. If she falls and cracks her skull, we'll have a sheriff at our doorstep. But Eudodia was past caring. That horse meant money, and Clementine was just another means to an end. Clementine met the stallion's eyes again. I'm just as trapped as you, she whispered. He nudged her gently. She took a breath, gripped his mane, and climbed. It wasn't graceful. She nearly slipped twice, but the stallion stood firm, waiting. When she finally mounted, something incredible happened. The golden horse began to walk steady, smooth as if this girl had been meant for him all along. As the ranch hands stared in stunned silence, Clementine did something she hadn't done in years. She smiled. But peace is never permanent on land ruled by greed, and what came next would shake the entire ranch to its core. The dust in the corral had barely settled when Clementine felt the change in the air. Beneath her, the golden stallion moved with purpose, measured, steady, and calm. But outside the fence, tension buzzed like a snake coiled too long in the sun. Eudodia Baxter's face had gone from shock to something darker, tight-lipped, red-cheeked rage. He didn't speak at first. He simply stared, like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. His worthless girl, as he often called her, was now seated proudly atop a creature more valuable than any cattle on his land. Enough, he barked suddenly, his voice sharp like the crack of a whip. Get down from there. Clementine's heart sank. She hadn't expected this magic to last forever, but she had hoped for more than a few precious minutes of peace. Still, she obeyed, slipping off the stallion's back. Her legs trembled from effort and emotion. As soon as her feet touched the ground, the horse stepped forward, positioning his bulk between her and Eudodia, protective, watchful. The ranch hands murmured amongst themselves. No one had ever seen a wild stallion act like this. It wasn't just trained obedience. It was something deeper, something almost sacred. I want to see if she can control him outside the pen, Eudodia ordered, snapping them all back to attention. Martha grabbed his arm. You fool. If that horse runs off with her, we lose both. There's no guarantee he'll stop. If he bolts, he could drag her to her death. Eudodia shook her off, eyes alight with something desperate. If she can ride him in here, she can. Ride him out there. I've got buyers waiting. That horse is our future. Clementine remained silent, her eyes darting from the stallion to the open gate. The ranch hands had begun to pull wide. The breeze that swept through it felt different, cooler, wilder. The scent of sagebrush and wind. Freedom. The stallion lifted, his head, ears twitching forward, his entire body tensed. She could feel it in the ground beneath her, he knew. And he wanted out. Eudodia's voice was low and urgent. Mount him. Let's see what he'll do on open ground. Clementine didn't move. Not yet. Her gaze remained on the stallion, who was now standing as still as a statue, his dark eyes flicking to the gate and then back to her. He was asking a question. Do you trust me? Her answer came not in words, but in action. With a deep breath, she stepped to his side and swung herself up onto his back. This time, it felt easier, as if he was helping her somehow, his body, a solid foundation she had never known. And then he moved, not in anger, not in panic, but with the kind of purpose only wild things understand. The stallion galloped through the open gate, Clementine clutching his mane, wind tearing through her tangled hair. The world around her blurred. Shouts echoed from behind Dododia. The ranch hands, but none of it mattered. She was moving, truly moving, not because someone ordered her to, but because she chose to. Behind her, Dododia screamed, "Bring them back, saddle the horses." But they were already disappearing over the rise. Clementine leaned into the horse's neck, care streaming down her cheeks, not from fear, but from something deeper. Joy, relief, hope. The stallion didn't hesitate. He flew across the desert, like he had been waiting his whole life for this moment. Round cacti, over rocks, across dry riverbeds. He moved like a dream. Up, and Clementine clung to him as if letting go meant waking up. After a while, the pounding of his hooves began to slow. They came to a small creek tucked between cottonwood trees, a hidden pocket of peace in the vast emptiness. The horse lowered his head to drink, sides heaving gently. Clementine slid down, her legs aching, her hands raw, but her heart full. She knelt by the water and caught her reflection for the first time in days. Bruised cheek, sunburned skin, but her eyes were bright, alive. A spark she hadn't seen since childhood flickered there. The stallion nudged her gently, his breath warm on her shoulder. She turned to him and whispered, "We can't go back, can we?" He snorted softly. She took it as a no, but their peace didn't last long. FVS, more than one. Clementine's heart skipped. She scrambled to her feet, scanning the horizon. Dust clouds, riders approaching fast. Dododia wasn't about to lose his prize so easily. The stallion tensed again, sensing the threat. But this time, Clementine didn't reach for him. She didn't need to. He stepped toward her on his own. In minutes, the riders crested the nearby hill. Clementine saw Dododia at the front, his face twisted in fury. Behind him were two ranch hands and one more figure, distinct from the others. Deputy Wade. Harper. Clementine's breath caught. The deputy had visited the ranch a few times over the years. He was quiet, observant. She had always felt a faint sense of safety in his presence, though he had never intervened. Now, he rode beside the very man she had escaped. As they drew near, Dododia spurred forward. There they are. Surround him. But Harper raised a hand. Hold it. The rider slowed, the dust settling. Clementine hesitated. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The horse was fast, but the others were fresh. She was exhausted. Harper approached slowly, hands visible, voice calm. "Miss Ross," he called. "Nobody's going to hurt you." Dododia wasn't done. "She stole my horse, deputy. That's my property. I want her arrested, and I want that animal returned to my corral." Harper turned in the saddle. "Your horse? That's interesting. Last I checked, wild horses in this territory belong to whoever breaks and claims them. Looks like she's the only one who's done that." Dododia scoffed. "She's my ward. Everything she does belongs to me." Harper's eyes darkened. "I've heard plenty about how you treat your ward. Those bruises tell me more than your mouth ever could." The air thickened. The other riders shifted uncomfortably. The moment balanced on a knife's edge, and Clementine knew this. was her chance. "Deputy," she said, her voice trembling, "there's something you need to know." All eyes turned to her, and what she revealed next would shake more than just Eudodia's lies. It would crumble the Eudodias of the control. He'd built and opened a door Clementine had long believed would never exist. The silence after Clementine's words was deafening. The golden stallion stood close beside her, his ears twitching as he sensed the growing tension in the air. The other horses snorted and shifted beneath their riders. All eyes were on her, and she felt the weight of their expectations pressing down like the desert sun. Deputy Harper sat quietly on his horse, his gaze steady. "Go on, Miss Ross," he said gently. Clementine swallowed, her throat dry. She looked at Eudodia and then at Harper. She could feel the stallion's breath beside her shoulder. It gave her strength. "The contract," she began, her voice shaking but clear. "The one Mr. Baxter says binds me to his ranch. ... It was for my father's medical debts." Eudodia stiffened in his saddle. "That's right. He owed me, and you're paying it off." Clementine shook her head slowly. "It was paid 2 years ago." A wave of disbelief swept through the group. Even Martha Baxter, riding behind her husband in a rare appearance outside the house, leaned forward in her saddle. Eudodia's face turned red. "What are you talking about? That contract was binding." Clementine's voice grew stronger now. "I didn't know at first. Kept working, kept quiet, but one day I overheard Martha talking to the banker in town. Told her the debt had been settled by an anonymous benefactor, paid in full. But Eudodia kept me anyway. Told me I still owed him." "Let me believe it." Gasps rippled through the riders. Even the ranch hands looked shaken. They had followed orders, but few of them had known the full truth. Deputy Harper narrowed his eyes. "Is this true?" Eudodia opened his mouth to protest, but Clementine beat him to it. She reached into the small pouch tied at her waist and pulled out a folded piece of paper, worn, crumpled, but still legible. She handed it to the deputy. "I found it buried in the ranch house drawer months ago. Martha had hidden it. I didn't understand what it meant at first, but then I did." Harper read it, scanning the signature in the note of debt forgiveness. He whistled softly. "This is dated 2 years back." Eudodia tried to lunge forward in his saddle. "That paper doesn't change anything. She still lives on my land, eats my food." Harper raised a hand like a steel wall. "Enough." He turned to the other men. "This girl has been working as a servant, beaten and threatened, under a debt. That was cleared. That's illegal in every sense of the law." Martha's voice rang out, sharp and unexpected. "She stayed because she was useful, and because you wouldn't let her leave." Her voice cracked. "We needed her. You needed her." Eudodia wheeled his horse around to glare at her. "You're not helping, woman." But it was too late. The mask had slipped. The stallion, sensing Clementine's tension, moved closer to her again. She stroked his neck with a shaky hand. He remained still, her anchor in the storm. Harper looked down at her from the saddle. "You have the right to leave, Miss Ross. Now, no one can stop you. Not anymore." She met his eyes, the desert wind pulling at her tangled hair. "I left the moment I climbed on his back." Harper nodded once, slowly, then ride. Eudodia's fury erupted. "She's taking my horse. That beast is worth a fortune." "You mean the wild horse your best men couldn't get within 10 feet of Harper?" snapped. "You had your chance." She earned his trust. "Then I'll take it back," Eudodia growled, yanking a coiled rope from his saddle. "By force, if I have to." The moment he moved, the stallion reared high, his front hooves slicing through the air, a scream ripping from his throat. Eudodia's horse backed away, startled, nearly unseating its rider. "Easy," Harper barked. "Everyone stand down." The stallion was already in motion. His powerful legs thundered against the ground, nostrils flaring, mane wild. Clementine grabbed his mane and swung herself onto his back as he turned in one fluid motion. "Take us," she whispered into his ear. "Anywhere but here." The stallion exploded into motion. Behind them, chaos erupted. Chidodia shouted curses. Ranch hands fumbled for their reins. Martha, pale and silent, sat still, her eyes fixed on the vanishing silhouette of the girl who had once cleaned her. Floors. Clementine didn't look back. The desert opened before her like an unwritten page. The stallion ran hard, hooves kicking up bursts of red dust. Clementine held tight, her body molded to his, her eyes burning with wind and tears. For the second time that day, she fled the only home she had ever known, and this time, it wasn't escape, it was freedom. They galloped across the arid land until the sound of pursuit vanished behind them, until the voices were only echoes in the canyon walls. The stallion slowed, then trotted into the shade of a rock overhang. Clementine dismounted, legs shaking. She sat beside a small spring, wiping dust from her face. Her breath came in gasps, and her heart pounded. But it was not fear she felt. It was release. She looked at the stallion, her silent companion, her savior, and whispered, "Thank you." He nudged her shoulder gently, his eyes full of something ancient and wise. They stayed there for a while, surrounded by silence and wind. The sun low on the horizon. She didn't know where they would go next, but for the first time in her life, Clementine didn't feel trapped by the unknown. She was walking toward it, and that in itself was everything. The desert sky shifted from blue to orange as twilight spilled across the land. Clementine sat quietly beside a flickering campfire, the golden stallion lying a short distance away, his breath calm and even. She hadn't expected to sleep outdoors that night, but she also hadn't expected to be free. She was free, and yet freedom didn't come with direction. The land was vast and unfamiliar. She had no family left, no money, no destination, just a loyal horse and a growing resolve. Still, it was more than she'd ever had, and that, she reminded herself, was enough to begin. As darkness fell, a light breeze picked up. The stallion stirred, ears twitching. Clementine reached over and ran her fingers gently along his mane. "I don't know where we're going," she murmured, "but I know we can't turn back." In the distance, the faint howl of a coyote carried across the plains. It wasn't threatening, it was a song, a reminder that wild things belonged to the night. She pulled her arms around herself and leaned against the horse's flank for warmth. By morning, she had made a decision. They would follow the river. Water would mean towns, maybe work, maybe people who wouldn't treat her like property. 3 days later, the town of Dry Hollow appeared like a mirage just after noon. Nestled in a shallow valley surrounded by mesquite trees and faded storefronts. Clementine's heart raced as she approached. It wasn't the most welcoming place, dusty and tired looking, but it was new, and that gave it power. She led the stallion on foot, not wanting to attract too much attention, riding him bareback into town. They passed a general store, a smithy, and a church with chipped paint on its steeple. A few townsfolk glanced her way suspicious, curious, but most returned to their business. She stopped outside a livery stable where a young man with straw blonde hair leaned against a post, chewing on a toothpick. "That's a fine-looking horse," he said, straightening. "You looking to sell?" "No," Clementine said quickly. "Looking for a place to rest." He nodded. "Well, I got room. In the barn. $1 for the night. $2 if you want feed." She reached into her pouch and produced her last few coins, barely enough. The boy hesitated, looking at her torn dress, the bruise still fading on her cheek. "You all right, miss?" Clementine paused. It had been so long since anyone asked her that with sincerity. "I am now," she said. She stayed in the loft above the stable that night. Nestled in clean hay, a warm blanket borrowed from the stable boy's kind-hearted mother. The stallion rested below, and she could hear him huff gently in his sleep. The next morning, she was up before the sun. New routines. Over the next week, Clementine found odd jobs around town. She scrubbed floors at the bakery, stitched torn coats for the general store's owner, and helped the pastor's wife tend to a sick baby. She worked hard, and for the first time in her life was paid in coins, not commands. She washed with warm water, ate a hot meal without earning it with bruises, laughed once by accident when the baker's son dropped a tray of rolls on his own foot, and howled like he'd been shot. People didn't ask too many questions about where she came from. She let them believe what they wanted, that she was a ranch girl passing through, or a traveling seamstress. But they could all see one thing clearly: she had a bond with the golden stallion that went beyond ownership. Every morning, she visited him in the stable, brushing his coat and talking to him like an old friend. Townsfolk often stopped to watch, mesmerized. No saddle, no bridle, just a girl and a creature of pure instinct. The sheriff even paid a visit one morning. A tall, slow-speaking man named Avery heard tell from Wade Harper down south that you tamed a wild horse without rope or whip, he said, resting a hand on his belt. Clementine simply nodded. Double quotes. Well, I'll be, he said. Never seen anything like that, and you ride him only when he lets me. The sheriff smiled. That's real respect. That ain't something you teach. Whispers from the past one evening as Clementine returned to the stable. She found a letter waiting for her, a clean envelope with her name written carefully across the front. She opened it slowly. Inside was a note from Deputy Wade Harper. Miss Ross, I wanted you to know Baxter was sentenced to 2 years hard labor. Martha left a ranch and bought a small home near Bisbee with what little she could recover. I hope you've found peace. If ever you need help, come to Prescott. My door is always open. Harper. Clementine folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her skirt pocket. For the first time, she felt something close to closure. Justice had been served. Her name had not been forgotten. That night, she stood beneath the stars outside the stable, hand resting on the stallion's neck. We're safe now, she whispered. We're free. The offer. 2 weeks later, an older rancher from out east arrived in Dry Hollow. Word had reached him of the girl with the wild horse, and he came with an offer: land, feed, a wager. She would help gentle the horses on his ranch. He had a reputation for fairness, and though Clementine had every reason to distrust men in power, this one spoke plainly, with kindness. You've got something special, he said, and I could use someone like you. Clementine thought of the years she had lost, the dust and lashes and sleepless nights. She thought of the fire in Yedodia's eyes, and the way freedom had tasted the moment the stallion carried her across the open range. And she thought of the choice she now had. I'll come, she said, but only if I keep him. She nodded toward the golden stallion. The rancher chuckled. I'd be a fool to think otherwise. As they rode out of Dry Hollow days, laid Clementine on the stallion's back. The rancher beside herd townsfolk waved from doorways. Children ran alongside them for a time. Stable boy tossed her a satchel of cookies and called, Don't forget us. I won't, she called back. The road ahead stretched into the sunlit distance, wide and open, and Clementine Ross, once treated like livestock, now rode as a woman who had chosen her own path. The stallion snorted and picked up his pace, ears pricked forward. He knew the way. The ranch's land sprawled across open plains, a patchwork of fenced pastures, wild mesquite, and endless sky. Unlike the Baxter Ranch, this place wasn't ruled by fear. It moved on rhythm and respect. Men tipped their hats when Clementine passed. They watched her work with the horses, not with skepticism, but with quiet admiration. The golden stallion who townsfolk had started calling a Sunfire remained her closest companion, though she still hadn't claimed him with the name herself. She liked the sound of it. It fit. Key was the creature who lit her darkest nights and carried her into freedom. Weeks turned into months. Clementine began to heal not just her body, but her spirit. The bruises faded, and color returned to her cheeks. She laughed more often now. She even found herself singing while brushing Sunfire's coat. The other horses watched from the paddocks, and slowly they too began to approach her without fear. The rancher, Mr. Wilcox, proved true to his word. He paid her fairly and let her keep to herself. He never asked about her past, only watched in respectful silence as she did what no one else could: build trust with even the most anxious of animals. He once joked, "You don't train horses, you just listen to them." And maybe that was true. Clementine didn't speak much to others, but with horses, she didn't have to. They already understood. A visit from the past one afternoon in late spring, a rider arrived with a familiar badge pinned to his chest. Deputy Wade Harper stepped off his horse and dusted off his coat. "Thought I'd check in," he said, eyes kind beneath the brim of his hat. "Been hearing stories about a girl with a golden stallion and hands that calmed the wild." Clementine smiled softly. "Seems some stories do spread." He looked around. "Looks like you landed in a good place." She nodded. "The kind I never thought existed." They sat beneath a cottonwood tree, drinking cold water from a canteen as Sunfire grazed nearby. "I wanted to tell you," Harper said, his voice low. "Yododia was released early good behavior, they say. But he's not the same. Lost his land, his animals. Word is, he's living in a boarding house near the border. Nobody wants him around." Clementine didn't speak. "Not right away. Then she said, 'I don't hate him. I don't think I ever did.'" Harper tilted his head, curious. "After everything, I pitied him more than anything," she said. "He never understood that power built on fear always crumbles." The deputy watched her for a long moment, then smiled. "You've changed?" "No," she said quietly. "I've just remembered who I was supposed to be." The girl and the horse by summer, Clementine had become something of a local legend. Children came to watch her work with the horses. Travelers paused at fence lines, hoping to catch a glimpse of the golden stallion. Older folks in town whispered stories of how she'd escaped Baxter's cruelty and rode into the desert like a ghost. Some embellished the tail-ending bandits or gunfights, but Clementine didn't mind. Let them talk. What mattered was that she was free, and Sunfire, he grew calmer, stronger. He never let anyone else ride him, not even once. But for Clementine, he knelt, waited, carried her like wind across the prairie dot. Every now and then, it would take long rides with no destination in mind, just chasing the sun, the stars, or the wind. Those were the best days. A hard choice late. One evening, Clementine sat by the fire with Mr. Wilcox. They watched the stars appear above the ranch. "Please," and the horses shifted in the fields below. He cleared his throat. "I've been thinking about selling this place," he said. "It's time for me to slow down." Clementine turned to him, surprised. "But I don't want to sell it to just anyone," he continued. "I want you to have it." Her mouth opened, but no words came. "I've written up a share contract," he said. "You work here, you live here, you manage it hand. One day, it's yours in full." Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. He handed her the folded paper. "You've earned this. You belong here, Clementine." She looked at the stars, Ken at the golden horse grazing nearby, and she said the only word that mattered: "Yes." The lesson that left years passed, and though people changed, one story remained in the hearts of everyone who lived in that dry stretch of Arizona. It's the tale of the girl who was treated like a slave, and the wild horse who wouldn't let her stay. That way, some say the stallion was sent by God. Others believe he was just as broken as she was, and that, together, they healed. Clementine never argued either way. She just lived her truth. She built a ranch of her own, one rooted in kindness. She taught others to work with animals, not dominate them. She took in orphaned girls and hungry boys and gave them the things she never had a safe place to grow. And always, by her side, was the golden horse Dot, old now, still proud, still wild in his heart. Final ride the day, Sunfire passed. Clementine stayed with him until the sun dipped below the hills. She sat beside him, forehead pressed to his, whispering the same words she had spoken the day they first escaped. Take us home, boy, wherever that might be. He went quietly, with no rope, no fear, just peace. Epilogue. The wind remembers, in Dry Hollow. They say you can still hear hoofbeats, some nights light and steady. It's like rhythm on the wind, and sometimes, just sometimes, a rider appears in the distance on a golden horse. No one ever catches her. They say she's not meant to be caught. She's a reminder that even when the world tries to cage you, some spirits were born to run.